you're ready, we will start our questions now.
Yes.
All right. So I know with your recent collaboration with Aaron Livingston with Iceberg, tell me a little bit about the process of that. What were the creative juices that were happening?
Let's see. Where did that project seems to go back about 4 or 5 years. It started from just me throwing out the idea, let's record a tune or two, and so I wrote a couple songs for this record, The Colossus, and he pitched him them, and he said, hey, you want to basically sing these better than I can. And one of those songs ended up on The Colossus, which is a song called Crumbs Off the Table. And from there, we were like, let's do something that's a little more, let's keep doing this, but do it in a manner in which, I wanted to turn all of the lyric and melodic duties over to him and keep all of the production, and I would do the production and he would do the everything related to vocals basically, and that's how it happened. And we just approached it like it was a very organically. We didn't really sit down and say, okay, we're making an album, here's what the first song should sound like, and here's the second song. We just recorded tunes, and it would just sort of unfolded basically. And at a point we're like, okay, we've got an album, why don't we call this why don't we basically started a group, so let's treat it as such. So we came up with a name, and that was that basically.
Yeah, and of course you're a producer as well, and you have, I'm sure both your different types of music and genres came together. And what would you say is your type of style of genre? Because I mean, whenever I listen to you, I hear, I hear a little bit of hip hop here, a little bit of electronic here, a little bit of jazz here, just there's so many different things going on at one time. How would you best describe your genre of music, your style? Yeah.
Should I wait?
Yeah, we'll just wait a second. Sorry. Okay, so like I said, with you producing, and you're really involved in all these different types of genres, putting it all together into one great awesomeness. And I was always wondering, how would you describe your own style? It's a question that I'm notoriously bad at answering, and I always evade. And the main reason of that is that I don't think of music from a perspective of genre. I don't think of what I do as from a perspective of genre. I think it'd be fair to look at, say, I think of particular individual songs as maybe having a genre leaning. But like you said, it's good that you said that sometimes it sounds like it's jazz to you, and sometimes it sounds like hip hop, and sometimes it sounds like soul or whatever, so on and so forth. And I think that's a natural outgrowth of where people like me come from, which is I grew up listening to a bunch of music, and I still listen to a bunch of music, and I don't really want to pick one. So my solution to that is, instead of okay, this is my metal project, and I'm going to be in a metal band, and I'm going to play guitar in a metal band, and all the songs are going to be heavy metal sounding, then for me it makes more sense to just do that per song. You know what I mean? So I kind of think of certain, this song is going to be like a, loud, boisterous rock song, and this will be a, more subdued song that's and then within the song you can kind of stuff a little of this into a little of that, and really at the end of the day it's just you're a summation of the music that you like as a musician or a producer or an artist, and those things they kind of want to come out. And like I said, I love the fact that you are all over the place when it comes to not genres.
Thank you.
Love the fact that you are putting a little bit of everything here, and it kind of keeps the listeners on their point too, because it's what am I listening to? But it's
good.
They listen to RJD2, not oh, it's this, it's that, So even when people ask me what kind of music does he do? I'm like, you should check it out, because it's literally everything you can ask for. I love that.
Well, thank you.
I love that about it. It's awesome. And as far as you DJing, how did you even get into disc jockeying, really?
Well, I was always a fan of rap music, and not exclusively, but it's always a thing that I liked since I was a kid. And I had a friend that was a rapper, and he was also a DJ, and he was looking to sell his gear. He had a bunch of records and a DJ setup, and he was looking to sell it. So I bought it off of him, and I messed around with it for a little while, and I kind of fell into it. It wasn't something that I really sought out and said, oh, I want to be a DJ. You know, I just kind of, you know, stumbled upon it basically. But it stuck, and it was fun, and it was intriguing, so I stuck with that, and that led to, initially I was just playing rap records, and then that led to a thing of, I started incorporating the records that got sampled to make rap music into my DJ sets. So then I was playing like rap, but then sometimes funk records or soul records or something that got used for a particular rap song. And through that got me interested in production. You know, I ended up amassing a bunch of records that had all these, you know, samples that had never been used on records, and I was like, oh, somebody should use this, and I was like, oh, why don't I just do that? So it's kind of where it all started.
And when you are producing, what are some of your thoughts when you're kind of just, whether you're DJing with the, you know, spinning the disc at the moment, or when you're putting the beats together, what are some of the thoughts that's happening in your head as you're trying to create literally nothing into something that's amazing?
The best I could describe it is, in a way, I kind of see it as a sequence of reactions to everything, something that previously happened. So maybe a decent analogy would be like, in the same way that you might not go into a conversation with your friend about, oh, I want to talk about this thing, and let's get to the bottom of this. You just sit down to dinner and you say, yeah, how are you doing? And then, you know, he says, oh, I'm doing okay, and then, or, you know, and you know how a conversation can just naturally progress through its own volition by people responding, you know, with a sense of immediacy to each other. That's very much how I see for me, making music, when I'm producing, the best results seem to come from a situation where I'm not necessarily aiming for a particular target. I more just get the ball rolling on a thing, and what I'm doing is reacting to each previous step. So you just get yourself to step 2 or 3 or 4, and then from there you're just making immediate decisions based on the previous step, and hopefully you end up with this thing that, you know, it kind of just becomes what it wants to be, if you will, instead of you shooting for it, trying to force it into a particular, you know, archetype or form, if you will, maybe.
And tell me a little bit about your label, your record label. You have your own now, and I guess what kind of artists are you looking for? Are you looking to recruit people? What is your creative artist profile that you would love to get from them?
You know, I honestly, at this point in time, I don't know if I've only put out records that are things related to what I do, and that's kind of for an intentional, you know, a reason, which is I didn't start a record label because I wanted to be like Russell Simmons or something. I started a record label so I could maintain ownership of the master's recordings of of my own records, and have control over, you know, have outlets for things that I was a part of, like Iceberg, for an example, and just make sure that they got out there in a timely fashion, and we didn't spend 2 years, you know, dicking around trying to get a deal or something like that. And this peripheral benefit of me owning, you know, maintaining ownership of the masters. So that was really the kind of the primary drive behind the label. So I don't want to rule it out that, you know, at some point in time there could be a scenario in which, you know, I'd put out a record that is something that I didn't work on, but that's not why I got into. It's not why I started a record label, frankly. And furthermore, when I am in no way eager to be somebody else's boss or be like the head of a label. That you know, being on the other side of that coin would be a little foreign to me, because I spent so much time being the artist that, you know, signed to a record label where you just that dynamic. I'm not saying it's like the worst dynamic in the world, but I just don't want. I'm not eager to be on the other side of that dynamic.
So you pretty much just want to create music for yourself and give it to your fans, rather than like pushing someone into a direction they shouldn't be pushed into necessarily.
It's not as much that. It's more like I don't want to be you know, I wouldn't want to put out a record by someone and run the risk of, even if it was just a perception, run the risk of, like, in a year or two, they're like, oh, RJ's a dick. He didn't pay me for blah 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 blah, or you know what, something, or he didn't put money into promoting my album, or you know what I mean. At that point, I would be just a label guy, you know, and I'm not that eager to, you know. It's okay when it's my record because it's just me that's gonna blame, you know, me the artist that's gonna blame me the business guy for screwing the record up if I screw it up. But that all changes when it's somebody else, you know.
So definitely just stay as RJD2 as the artist, not the business mogul guy who's going to be.
Yeah, and I don't have any aspirations for being. It wasn't. I know that's kind of not the normal trajectory. I know that the way that things normally happen is people shift from being an artist. When an artist goes out and starts a record label, 9 times out of 10 they go out and they sign artists. They do it as a thing, like, okay, I'm making the shift from being an artist to an A&R, and I'm gonna go talent scouting, and I'm gonna find record artists, and I'm gonna develop them and produce them, and blah blah. And I just didn't really want to do that because I've seen the downside of that firsthand, in the perils of that shift, and I don't have any need to take that route or run that risk, really.
And as far as people who want to do exactly what you do right now, what kind of advice would you give someone who wants to be an up-and-coming DJ, producer? Because like you said before for yourself, you never had the plans necessarily to become a DJ. It kind of just happened, you know, you had the equipment in front of you, you were like giving it a shot, and it just became something that was part of you. So what kind of advice would you give someone who wants to do what you want to do, what you're doing right now?
I would say that the most, without a doubt, the most important thing that they can do is to just focus on making songs, making music, producing music. There's this, you know, huge laundry list of distractions and sidebars and rabbit holes that you can end up going down, and I see it happen all the time. And there's this one commonality that you know that I see amongst artists that are successful and they make it, and it's not that they, you know, networked with the right A&Rs, and it's not that they like played the right showcases or lived in the right city. None of that. There doesn't seem to be any, you know, common thread in any of those aspects. The one common thread is that these guys spent a lot of time recording and a lot of time making music, and through doing that, you will naturally come up with your own way to do things in your own style. It's just the way things work. It's basically a natural outgrowth of doing something for a long time and spending an inordinate amount of time. So I would say focus on that and don't worry about anything else, and let all the other stuff just happen. You'll get to a point where, you know, if you spend, you know, 3 years making records and making songs and honing, you know, you'll inevitably be honing your style, and you'll inevitably be, you know, sending your music to people, whether they be labels or putting it online or so on and so forth. All the other things that you need to do to make it will be natural outgrowths of that process. So don't worry about those; they're going to happen.
So what would you say? How long did it take for you to really launch off until you got yourself into the door?
Let's see. I started producing in 1997, and the first record that I made came out in 1998, which in hindsight is very short period turnaround time. I mean, I think it was 98 or 99. When I was in this group called the Megahertz, I can't remember. It's either 98 or 99 was the first record that I had my name on as a producer. And then, let's see, the 2001, I was part of this compilation that had a number of artists on it. So that was the first time that I was listed as a solo artist on a record. And then my first album came out in 2002. So that was, 5 years from the year that I started producing. And I had been a DJ for, you know, you got to realize, like, before 1997, I had been DJing and collecting records for a long time. So I already had I hit the ground running, basically. I mean, the day that I bought my sampler, I went home and I was making 5 beats a day because I already had this huge backstock of records that I wanted to use. So yeah, 5 years from when I first started producing to when my first album came out. And even then, I feel like that's kind of just the starting point for a career. I mean, it was, I'd say those first 3 or 4 years, 2002, 3, 4, 5, it was all kind of a whirlwind, and in ways it kind of happened very fast for me, but I was still just flying by the seat of my pants and doing, you know, I felt like I had to do every project that I got presented with and every tour that I got offered. So it wasn't until, I'd say maybe 2006 or 7 that I really kind of got a second to breathe, and that was probably the first time in which I maybe said no to something. So roughly 10 years after starting doing it, then it was the point where I you know, maybe even thought about, I don't even want to say slowing down, but just being selective with choosing the things that I did, instead of literally saying yes to everything.
So just have a couple more